where we are discussing from Romans 1:20 and from Hebrews 11:3 how we see God, the Creator in the universe. We look at Him, or look at this study from three perspectives. We see it from the what we call informal observation, that is, anyone who wants to go out and look at the universe, they can see that God created the world. From formal scientific observation, that's the observations of science, when they do scientific tests and stuff and prove that God created the world, and also from the scriptures, where the scripture teaches that God created the world. But what we're going to talk about tonight is how the creation of God is evidenced by science. All of the scientific laws prove over and over again that God created the world, and that there is a true and living God, and He is the God that we serve. So this is an apologetic study to give us an explanation, or the ability to explain how we know that God created the heavens and the earth, and that the God that created the heavens and the earth is the true God and the God that we worship. Thank you very much for joining. And also, those of you who have the study notes, you can answer the study questions as you look at the lesson tonight. God bless you and welcome to the Proof of God. Welcome back again to this class, our class where we're teaching on the Proof of God. Welcome to Bethesda Temple Church of Alton Bible class, International Association of Apostolic Apologists class on theology. And we are talking about the proof of God. We are talking about, in other words, we're saying the proof that God is, and that God created the world. And what we want to do in this study is we want to show, prove that God is, prove that God is the God of the Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the God of the church, and that we have the right God. And then we want to show the difference between the true God and the false gods. And so that's what we want to do, and so that we can know and be able to explain how we know that we're serving the true God. One thing I would say is that one of the objectives here is to be able to explain with confidence that we have the true God, the one that created the heavens and the earth, the true God, and so who made all things. And we have the confidence to say that we're in the right religion. We got the right God, we got the right religion, we got the right faith. And so one thing that we'll be showing is that in the Old Testament, God proved Himself to be the true God. And in the New Testament, Jesus Christ proved Himself to be that God, and that we are worshiping Jesus Christ. And so, on today's lesson, we're continuing on from the last lesson, where we talk about the proofs of God. There are about 4 proofs of God that we talk about, and the one proof of God that we're talking about now is the proof of God in the creation, the evidence of the Creator in the creation. We look at the creation, and the creation is telling us. It is one time I was reading a book, and the author was in a book on studying rocks and things like that, and the author talked about fossils and things like that, and he said concerning these fossils, it is what you call an environmental essay. In other words, the very environment tells the story of what was here and how things were made. And so this is what we're using the creation as the environmental essay, or the essay of the universe. Is where God put His handprint on creation in a way where it lets us know that He is God. And so that's what we're going to be studying today in the Proof of God. We're going to be studying, and we're going to go back to the book of Romans, in Romans chapter 1 and verse number 20 is where we're going to begin reading. Romans chapter 1. We can go to verse number 19. Romans chapter 1 and verse number 19. It says the universe, a revelation of the power and deity of God. That's the topic here in this Bible. The universe is a revelation. It is the inspiration of God. It is actually what Thomas Aquinas talked about. It talks about how the universe appeals, or the universe is explained. We absorb the knowledge of God through intelligence, and so we through intelligence can absorb the knowledge of God. In verse number 19 it says, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath shown it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. In other words, these, though the unbelievers are without excuse, because God has explained and shown to us in the creation all of the evidence that the Creator made the creation. In Thomas Aquinas' proof of God, 5 proofs of God, proof number 1 was concerning motion. He said that in order for whatever, the world is in motion, and it is in motion, and whatever is in motion had to have a mover to get it started. And so Aquinas says that God is the one who set the world and all of its things in motion. And so, another philosopher said that God is the unmoved mover. In other words, God moved and caused all of the things to occur in the world. So we look at God, and we look at God as the God who caused the motion of all things that are in the world. And so then we must keep in mind that God, here as the Apostle Paul says, that the evidence of God, the evidence of the intelligence of God, the evidence of the handiwork of God is seen in the universe. Last time, in the last lesson, I talked about the awe-ness. In other words, we look at the universe and we say about observations. We have an observation look. I want to talk about the difference between an observation look of the universe and a scientific look at the universe. The observation look of the universe, when we look at it just from a standpoint of observation, without research, without scientific testing, we are just looking at the universe for what it is. It is most certainly glorious. The trees and the grass and the animals all living within their habitations, and the animals that hibernate for the wintertime. Some of them sleep all winter long and come out in the spring. And we look at the ants, as the ants provide for themselves during the wintertime. All of this is the wisdom of God. The animals that grow hair to warm their bodies and shed the hair in the spring. All of these things are the glory of God. All of these things are proof that God created the universe. And so with these things, the first observation being the observation of our look at the universe as observation. And now let me go back to verse number 9. It says, verse number 20 says, for the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead. So in other words, the things that we see tell us the story about the creation, about the Creator. The creation itself is the evidence. It is the handiwork. It is the work of God, God's intelligence, God's power, and God's dominion. And so we can look at those things. Now, just briefly, I want to take you to another level of observation. First level of observation is the observation that does not require high-level scientific insight or high-level scientific explanations, does not require scientific testing to see, does not require a scientific method or theory. It does not require that, because a child can tell you that there's a God because he created the heavens and the earth. A person who had never been to school can look up at the sky and say, thank God for putting the sky and putting the moon in place and putting the stars in place and putting the sun in place and for the clouds. We don't need an education for that. In other words, no matter what level of intelligence you're at, you still can see, because within every man, according to Aquinas, according to the Word of God, within every man, we have what we call the intelligence. In other words, the intelligence of man actually capacitates the understanding that there is a God. Because your intelligence, the very intelligence that you have, and the very logic that you have, teaches you from that point that there is a God and that you ought to worship him. And so in your intelligence, and the intelligence of man, is also the soul of man, the soul that cries out, that wants God. And so everything is there without any kind of proofs or anything that God created the world and we ought to worship God. But what I want to do is I want to compare the observation looking at the creation. When I'm talking about looking at the creation in reference to Romans chapter 1 verse 20, he says they are clearly seen. It says here, for the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen. In other words, the things about God that you can only know by observing what God did. Now, detectives, I'll tell you something about detectives. Detectives, when they come to a crime scene and they see a crime that was committed by a certain criminal, when they get through, because of their training, when they get through, they can tell you what kind of criminal it was. They can tell you whether or not he was hasty, whether or not it was a person who had intelligence, how well they planned it out. They can tell you something about the criminal when they get through, going through and finding out all of the actions of the criminal. The criminal didn't have to meet the criminal. And not only that, but those people who design automobiles and they make these automobiles, you can tell a lot about the person who made the automobile by the automobile. They must have been intelligent people. Or a person who has a artwork. You can tell if you saw a picture of flowers and the flowers were there and everything, and you could see that it wasn't just a blob on a piece of paper. Then you could say that must have been an intelligent person who intended for us to see the beauty and the different colors in flowers. And so that's the same way it is with God in the creation. When you look and you see how orderly it is, then you'll know that God was the one that did it. So the second kind of observation I want to talk about in the clearly seen statement, or clearly seen, is the scientific observation, the observation of scientists. As the scientists study the creation, they study, and they are, let me tell you something, scientists are more apt to believe God, and because they have more revelation of God, because they do research, and the research causes them to understand more about God. All right? Keep in mind, they keep finding things out, and a scientist proves the existence of God by the discovery of the order of the universe. In other words, when you start talking about science and you start talking about what's clearly seen, what is clearly seen of the creation is clearly seen in scientific proofs. And they're constantly proving by every scientific proof, every scientific law. Our faith is based upon first believing and then by proof of what we believe. Now, so we believe, and one thing I do want to let you know concerning God is that God is more scientific than people like to think. He wants you to prove him. He wants you to put him to the test. He wants you to ask him, can you prove that there's a real God? He wants those questions. He wants you to prove and say how do you know you're serving the true God? He wants you because his whole entire procedure of instructing men is based upon God's willingness for you to test him. And he is not intimidated by theologians' questions or by scientists' questions. Prove the true God, because everything he does is in proof of him being the true God. So God's order of revelation is by observation and then by scientific validation. So we observe him in an elementary sense, not from a scientific standpoint, but from an observation standpoint. Then after we observe him, then through science, we validate him. God made the universe, then prompted science for the sake of the satisfaction of the curiosity of men about God, the Creator, to research and to prove that God created the world, prove the order of the world, prove the order of the universe. God invites scientists, scientific experimentation. He wants men to ask, how do we know God exists, and how do we know the difference between the true God and the false ones? He invites those questions. And so when scientists put God to the test, or when they try to study the universe and the order of the universe, that is where we come up with scientific laws. Scientific laws are the discoveries of the order of God who made the universe. They find out that there are certain laws. God didn't just throw the universe out there, but there are certain laws that govern the nature of the universe. The laws of nature put there by God. Men through science find them and make laws. Often the ones who finds the law has the law named after him, like Ohm's law. Ohm's law concerning, and so in other words, scientists go out and they research in what we call the scientific method. They first of all come up with what we call a hypothesis. This is the scientific method. The hypothesis. A hypothesis is an assumption. An hypothesis is an assumption from observation. As we observe patterns in the universe, we observe certain things that happen over and over again in nature, then we make a hypothesis. The hypothesis says, well, this must be the case. It must mean that when it rains, the ground gets wet, or whatever the hypothesis is. It must be the case that God put it in birds to fly south in the wintertime. And so the hypothesis is an educated guess. Then that hypothesis is tested. It's tested by observing the birds fly south every year. And after the birds fly south every year, then they can say that it must be true that the birds fly south. And in the scriptures it says this is wisdom within the inward parts of the bird. So the hypothesis is proven by scientific tests over and over again. When the guess is first put out there, it is what we call a theory, a scientific theory. And the main point I want you to see, it is a theory of the observation of the creation and the things in the creation that God has already put there. So the creation is made and structured in order, and it has laws, and scientists, all they're doing is discovering the laws of nature. And even in geometry and in algebra, if you study even the V formation of the geese that fly south and they form a V formation, all of those things are things that are embedded in the creation by the God who made the world. And over again, we keep finding out the wonders of the creation and how organized it is. And so these laws are simply the limits and the extent of the universe and the functioning of the universe. It describes the functioning, the nature of the universe, of these things that God has already put here. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this because this is what Paul was talking about when he says that the things of the invisible God are seen in those things that are seen. The invisible things of God are seen in those things that we see. In other words, God created a universe that is so well put together that if you study it, you'll find out that there are laws to it. It wasn't haphazardly done. And there's laws about time, and laws about energy, laws about space,
space and geometry, laws about the hydrosphere, that is the water part of the earth, the rain and the oceans, laws that govern the atmosphere, laws that govern the lithosphere, the rock part of the earth. And so there are laws in the universe. Scientists look and discover things. They study things. They study things and come up with proofs and tests and laws and various things that to prove the things that God has already put in the universe. Such as, and if you would study, such as the things as I said the other night, we as men are through our technology are seeing ourselves advancing to become greater and greater and greater, and we are moving back towards what originally was in the world when Adam was here. If we study the electronics and we study the computer, we study the internet. The internet is only a small thing compared to the intelligence that Adam had in the Garden of Eden before the fall. And so Adam had all of the attributes that we're trying to get to be able to fly, to study aerodynamics, and to be able to study about thrust and how to make a plane with so many thousands of tons fly through the air. All of this is in the universe that God made. And if it wasn't for an intelligent God, we wouldn't be able to see these things. And so it is the creation of God, where God created the world and he created the universe in a fashion that it is well structured and well ordered. And we could say simply by the universe preaching to us that God made it, and that all of the laws of the universe. If we want to study Newton's law, you want to study Newton's law of gravitation, if you want to study Ohm's law of electricity, if you want to study geometry, you want to study Pythagorean theorem, and you want to study all of these laws, about equations and all of everything that's going on and what they're learning in the universities is simply this constant overflow or a constant inflow of the knowledge and understanding of the universe that God made. So what the Apostle Paul is saying here is that they are without excuse, because it is higher observation and a higher knowledge when you have scientists who are constantly discovering the order and how precise and the order of the world is, and how God created it, how he made the neutron and the electron. He made all of matter. He has fixed matter to where matter can neither be created nor destroyed, but it can change its form, and the laws about weather. All of this is what the Apostle Paul was talking about when he says the things of the creation can show us. He says here in verse number 20, for the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen. Clearly seen how? Clearly seen by a person walking down the street and never been to school, or in a desert somewhere, and clearly seen by a scientist who's constantly discovering new discoveries of science and writing new laws and new books and laws of physics and laws of biology and laws of the biospheres, and every law that they come across, it opens their eyes again and again that there is a true and a living God. And so we must understand that these laws that are being discovered are the scientific observation of the creation, which teaches us that there is a true God, and he is a mighty God. And not only that, but as we study the laws of trigonometry, those of you who study trigonometry, you study functions, trigonometric functions, sine and cosine and tangent, cotangent. These are all things that you discovered that are laws that God created in the world. The laws of geometry, with the laws that make up a parallelogram that has two parallel sides, the laws that make up the circle. And when you don't want to talk about how to find the circumference of a circle, pi r squared, the area of a circle. If you want to find the diameter, back and it's for every circle in the world has that formula for finding those things. No matter how big it is, no matter how small it is, there is a certain formula for finding the circumference of a circle. There's a certain formula for finding the area of a circle. There's a certain formula for bagging into the diameter of a circle, and for every circle in the world. And not only that, the trigonometry is based upon what we call the Pythagorean theorem. And based upon the Pythagorean theorem, you have trigonometric functions. You can find out so many things, even about the way buildings are built, and about triangles. In every right triangle in the world abides by these particular laws of Pythagorean theorem. And so why is it then that when these scientists, and let me say this to you too, that when it comes to the scientists, you'll find that many of the scientists, and you'll find that many of them were philosophers, and many of them were ministers. And the way science is started, science starts with what we call philosophy. Actually, science, it starts with philosophy. And so and there is a relationship between science and philosophy. But how do we use science, how do we use philosophy to get to science? Well, according to the scientific method, when we're going to observe things in the universe, according to the scientific method, we start off with a philosophical, or what we may call an assumption. We start off with a guess, and that guess, educated guess, is what we call a hypothesis. And the hypothesis is, it'll make a statement, and we'll guess that the statement is true. And so we'll guess. And so if we make a statement and we say that water freezes at 32 degrees, well, that was just a hypothesis at first, even though it was already true by God in the universe. God already knew it. But when man came to the point where he wanted to find out whether or not that was true, he had to theorize that it froze at 32 degrees. So then the hypothesis comes first. The philosophy comes first. Then after the hypothesis, it becomes a theory. And then if they freeze it, and it freezes at 31.5, they may try again. And they may try again, and it may freeze at 34, and the conditions may be different. But if all things are equal, and you freeze water at 32 degrees, it will freeze. Once that's proven, then that becomes a law. And so the law is that water freezes at 32 degrees. And so once these hypotheses are tested, and now I was supposed to be telling you, I promise you I would tell you the difference between philosophy, not only philosophy, but theology. If you will know about Thomas Aquinas and St. Augustine, these were theologians. And Newton, these were ministers what happens is when Plato and Aristotle and all of them begin to talk and philosophize all day long, they make what you call assumptions all day long. And then when they go put these assumptions to the test, then those assumptions become theories. Then after they become theories, they become scientific laws. And so every study is what we call, according to the scientific method, starts off with philosophy first. Starts off with a theory. And so, and even in the study of man, what we call the study of anthropology, man's nature, man's soul, everything in the universe. The point I make to you today is that science proves the order of God over and over and over again. Over and over and over again. And so they are without excuse. They are without excuse. Those who scoff. Those who say they don't believe in the true God. Those who were deceived at the Tower of Babel. They're deceived because they do not believe in God. So now here's this lesson is to help us to see that the first level of belief is the preaching of the universe to us. In other words, the messages that are given to us in the universe by observation and by the validation of the scientific discoveries. and scientific proofs of the nature of the creation. And so this is point one of the proof of God. And so I would just review here by saying that if we want to prove God, we prove him by the observations of nature, both observation and by scientific experimentation. Thank you very much. God bless you, and we shall go on, because our goal is to show you, first of all, that God is, and that they who worship him, he's a rewarder of them that worship him. Then after we show to you and explain to you how you can explain that God is, then we're going to explain to you who God is, and we're going to find out who the real God is, and we're going to separate the real God, show you the difference between the real God and the false gods. God bless you and keep you. In Jesus' name is our prayer. And we look forward to you listening to us again the next time. Next time we're going to be talking about the proof by power. Amen. I would like to thank you very much for joining us tonight for Bible class and for class at the IAAA. We hope that you learned something from this, and we thank God for you. Also, you should see on the screen a link to the study guide where you can go in and answer the questions. You can play these tapes back, and you can answer the questions, and some of you can receive course credit for them, and others you're just going to be enriched. And also, you can make notes and ask questions online. And so we thank you very much, and may God bless each and every one of you and keep you, and thank you for listening to Bethesda Temple Church of Alton, and you are sitting in on our Bible class tonight. God bless you and have a blessed day.